Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Goldberg, and I'm the President and CEO of GBH. Tonight, GBH and World present The State of Race, the Invisible Becoming Visible, our 17th annual Asian American and Pacific Islander Cultural Heritage Month event, and my first since coming to GBH. Thank you all for joining us who are here in person, and thank you to the hundreds more watching remotely from locations across the country in celebration of AAPI Cultural Heritage Month. Honoring and amplifying diverse voices is a priority across GBH and one for me personally. Especially, it's important to ensure that the lived experience of the diverse AAPI community are told from an authentic perspective. This community event does just that by celebrating the rise of AAPI leaders to positions of power and who are inspiring positive change in the community. These individuals have been trailblazers in industries where Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have historically been absent. Our panelists include leaders selected to represent us locally, statewide, and nationally, C-suite executives, artists, and entrepreneurs. Their successful journeys show that what was previously impossible now is happening. Tonight would not have been possible without the tremendous support we've received from friends in the community, including the GBH Board of Trustees, Board of Advisors, and Advisors Council, who are instrumental in planning this wonderful event. We are so grateful for their leadership and generous commitment to GBH, and for all they do as important ambassadors of our work. Thanks also go to our event sponsor, Bernadine Sung Megason and Tim O'Sullivan of Compass Real Estate. I also want to thank community groups partnering with us tonight, including the Asian Community Fund, India Society of Worcester, Saheli Boston, and Viet Aid. Now, we have lots of ground to cover, so to get the evening started, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Liz Cheng, General Manager for GBH Television and our national nonfiction service, World. Liz.
Thank you so much, Susan. And can we have another round of applause for our very first woman CEO and President of GBH? Very impressive. Well, I want to welcome you all to this family reunion, because that's the way it feels. We've done this for 17 years in a row. I've been involved for 10, and thanks to all of you for coming and participating. We really appreciate it. Certainly here at GBH, and certainly those at home online. When I think about tonight's theme, the invisible becoming visible, I can't help but feel joyful, especially in contrast to the dark days of the pandemic, when AAPI became visible for the wrong reasons. From across the country, we were blamed for the genesis of COVID-19 and endured too many attacks and shooting deaths. Thankfully, tonight, we celebrate those who have become visible for the right reasons, their leadership in politics, in business, and the arts. At GBH and World, our commitment to honor AAPI community is evident year-round. Yet during our Cultural Heritage Month, we like to put an exclamation point on our efforts by featuring, now take a listen, more than 50 films about and by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, including 7 films premiering in the series Asian American Stories of Resilience and Beyond. And that can be seen on World's weekly series, Local USA. These stories feature a cross-section of countries of origin, as well as issues from navigating COVID-19 and a history of violence against Asian Americans to discovering identity and resilience. Let's take a look.
When I looked at the archival, it was always really hard to watch that because that's how I remember my dad.
Everyone that I've grown up with and love is at risk of being attacked or killed.
Our
country is still in this place where we have this conversation about Black versus white versus Latino versus Asian versus Indigenous. We forget that so many of these communities are intermixed.
And here's Lonnie riding the pine, collecting splinters again.
It's heavy, Dad.
These are also American stories. These are also human stories, and they're all relatable in my eyes.
Intentional unit, there is only one shooter, gunshot wound to the head. He is down.
I felt an affinity for this story.
There is no protocol for these things. I don't know what to do.
The Punjabi Sikh community is very strong. There's so many ways people have been resilient, coming together.
Life है strong होके जीनी पैंदी है.
There is a narrative of resilience with refugees and immigrants. They're the bearers of all this historical trauma, and they somehow magically get through it. And so I wanted to honor the resilience but not idealize my mom's struggle.
There were so many times I really didn't want to make this film.
Hi, Dad. Dad, are you tired?
This hits in a different way when you are an Asian woman, and if you know what those sort of responsibilities can be like to care for folks in your family.
This is not my dad. Like, this is not how he normally is. So he has COVID, right? Are there prayers to pray for my dad? If someone pray for my dad since we can't be there.
Those narratives, those ancestors' voices, our families' voices are critical to preserving who we are, and those stories need to be told.
There are just so many hard topics and hard experiences that do need to be shared. The exchange to me is bringing down the wall of saving face to hopefully open up the conversation and make change.
I haven't seen my mom since 98, I believe. Last time was behind glass. Oh, Mom is here!
I'm the fourth generation of my family in Hawaii, and my mom's side is Chinese, and my dad's side is Filipino.
So I'm California born and raised, half Korean and half white American.
I was born in London.
I'm the eldest daughter. Both my parents immigrated from the Philippines.
Voila.
My dad is Afro-Puerto Rican, and then my mom is Native Hawaiian, Polynesian, Filipino. It makes it so hard to relate to people sometimes, but then at the same time, you can relate to so many people.
Everyone's point of view is special. I think the more we have slight nuances of difference, the more we can really understand our society.
These films of resilience are premiering on the broadcast tonight on the 22nd and can be accessed on our website. We're also featuring the premiere of the film Blurring the Color Line, which provides a fascinating portrait of a Chinese-American family living and running a grocery store in a black neighborhood in segregated Augusta, Georgia during the Jim Crow era. Let's take a look.
Can I ask you a quick question? In the segregated South, buses were separated, black people in the back, white in the front. Where do you think the Asians sat? My grandma Pearl, she moved with her family to Augusta, Georgia in 1927, where they ran a grocery store in the black neighborhood. What did it mean to grow up Chinese in a black and white space?
Now, when I was growing up, the expression, we had a Chinese grocery store on every corner. You know, the laws at that time were so limited, but not applying to the Chinese.
Segregation was nothing more than a pseudo way of carrying on slavery.
How did they end up in the black neighborhood?
They are still people of color. You can only go so high.
And at school, they were mostly white kids. Did you feel?
All white kids.
How did that make you feel?
No mingling at all.
The Chinese, you know, there's some of them that they don't want nothing to do with the blacks, but yet they want their money, you know.
They played the blacks against the Chinese like the Chinese were a little better than the blacks and the whites was a little better than the Chinese. That's the way it went.
Black people in Augusta are tired of being told that there is no racial problem here. Now the nation knows that Augusta has a problem.
The whole city was burned. They target the Chinese stores and the white businesses.
Well, you know, during the riot, those that got burned down are the ones that didn't treat the blacks good.
How are we going to move forward if we don't address the past?
Also premieres on the 25th and can be seen online. All 8 films are fascinating. I hope you get a chance to take a look at them. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Mayor Michelle Wu on tape, who will be introducing our next panel. If the panelists, as they hear in their name, can come up and be seated, that would be wonderful. So let's take a listen to Mayor Wu. Thank you all.
It's Mayor Michelle Wu, and I want to wish you a happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Thank you to GBH for inviting me to be a part of tonight's event and for creating space for conversations like tonight's panels. I am humbled to be the first woman and first Asian American elected mayor of Boston, and so it's my deep honor to introduce tonight's first set of panelists who are trailblazers and fellow public servants from across the Commonwealth. State Representative Tram Nguyen, the first Vietnamese American elected to office in Massachusetts. She's been an advocate for immigrants and workers' rights, for public health and safety, and for a greener future for all of us. Lisa Wong, the first Asian American woman elected mayor in Massachusetts, now serves as town manager of South Hadley. Lisa's leadership has set an example statewide on key issues such as education, healthcare, and the environment. And Eileen Jay, vice chair of the Lexington Public Schools Committee, every step Eileen has taken since her re-election last spring has been in service of continuing to center the well-being of Lexington students. Thank you to all of you for participating. And finally, your moderator, Leverett Wing, President and CEO of Commonwealth Seminar and a valued member of the GBH board. Leverett's service to the Asian American community and to households across Massachusetts span decades and have opened the doors for so many, including myself. Thank you all for being here and sharing your insights with all of us tonight. Please join me in welcoming this evening's first panel.
Good evening. I don't know how to, oh, there we are, it's turned on. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much. Thank you to Mayor Wu for her wonderful, kind, generous introduction. She has been an inspiration and an example to so many of us with her vision, with her grace under fire, her tenacity, and her generosity. And we are also grateful for her decision to pursue a career and life in public service. So thank you to Mayor Wu for that. Admittedly, I did wince when she referenced my decades in public in serving the community. My first thought was, oh wow, that makes me sound really old. But to be honest, as usual, Mayor Wu is correct. I have been back at this since way back in the 20th century. But to be serious, I have seen and experienced the theme of tonight's celebration, the invisible becoming visible firsthand in the world of politics. For a few years, I was the only Asian American in the Massachusetts State House. I was mistaken, actually it wasn't a mistake, I was assumed to be a member of the cleaning crew. I was assumed to be a member of the postal staff. There was a longer story that goes with it, and it was very personal to me. I remember when I could count on one hand the number of the entirety of Asian American elected officials in the entire state. And now we actually have an Asian American caucus up at the State House, which is one of the largest in the country from what I gather. So this topic, exactly, go ahead and applaud. Exactly. And so this topic, this panel, is very important and it's very personal to me. And so while we still have some issues to address, and we'll hopefully get to some of those during the course of this panel, I'm thrilled at the progress that we've made. And I'm especially excited to be sitting here with 3 historic women that Mayor Wu referenced. Mayor Wu referenced both Tram and Lisa's historic firsts. And Eileen, you're also a first, the first Asian American woman elected in the town of Lexington, am I correct? So let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got here.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to tell our stories. I am a second-generation Chinese American, born and raised in a suburb of Boston, but it was at a time where Chinese weren't particularly welcome in the suburbs. In fact, my real estate agents told my parents, "We don't sell to Orientals." And so we were actually the first, or one of the first, non-white families in the entire town. And so I think that always gave me a sense of being an outsider. It was a world in which other people made decisions and their opinions mattered. But I always felt like my opinion was not necessarily as welcome. And there was just a feeling of, I don't really fully belong here. And so I remained quiet and tried not to call very much attention to myself. Well, that's not a particularly fitting profile for somebody to run for public office. But much later as an adult, I did it because I had a background and a graduate degree in education. But what actually really put me over the top on deciding to run was the opportunity to represent the AAPI community. In Lexington, our school population is 40 to 50% Asian. And yet at the time, there was no one on the school committee who could represent them. And when I ran, I felt that one of the unique roles I could bring was to be a bridge across two cultures. I felt that I did have the background in education. I went to schools in the US, but I also had a personal insight into some of the lived experiences of the Asian students and their families. For example, when students had to really do a lot of code switching between the expectations they had in school versus the expectations they had at home, that was something I could talk with them about and relate to. And so I think partly my being on the school committee helps to bring that insight in my work with my colleagues and the community so that we have the chance to do what's needed to support all students and to also build more cultural understanding, more cultural competence with our educators and our community. And I think one of the questions that has come up, I'm not sure you asked it, but I think implicit in this is that because we are pioneers, that comes with some challenges. I think one of the things that I find particularly challenging being an AAPI elected official is the assumptions that people make about you just because of the way you look. So there's some people in town who will look at me and they'll think, oh, all she wants to do is to have more AP courses and get kids into Ivy League schools. So there's an assumption there of sort of slapping on a stereotype without really knowing where I'm coming from, and it's not actually a true stereotype. And then on the other hand, there are a lot of expectation that the Asian community has about their expectations of what role I, as the kind of Asian representative, would play. And they're looking to me to advocate for their interests and mainly their interests. And I think that what it does is it presents a little bit of a dilemma of what does representation mean for us as AAPI elected officials? Who are we representing? And I guess I feel that, of course, as an elected official, my obligation is to serve everyone. I'm there to listen to the different points of view. Yes, I can bring a perspective and have some opportunity to voice particular ideas and cultural perspectives, but I'm really there to serve all individuals, all students, staff, and families, and listen to those perspectives and make the best judgment I can.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Eileen. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Lisa, I'll come to you next. I remember when you were elected, you actually have held a number of leadership positions throughout the state. And I remember when you were first elected out in Fitchburg, I think Emily, you and I, who everybody will hear from a little bit later on in the evening, we came to your inauguration, and it was a really exciting time and a really exciting moment for our community, and to see you continue that journey throughout the state. Tell us a little bit about what made you run and what makes you stay in this particular field.
Sure. Well, first, let me say that it's such an honor to be here, and I am glad for my decades of service to the community underneath me, because I just want to be able to justify the gray hairs. But it's actually really great, because I think all of us here are so busy. We are so mired in all of the activity and activism that is part of our lives and part of our makeup, and the reason why we've ended up on the stage. And we don't often have time to reflect upon that. And with a 9-month-old and a 4-year-old at home, and trying to make decisions now about how to raise them, it's also, I value these spaces to actually really think about that. And even though you want to talk about the inauguration, you made me think, Eileen, about just some of the things that really sparked, I think, the way that I viewed the world as a child. Because if we are really thinking about it, children are so important, because the ideals and ideas that they have are really shaped then. So having grown up actually and living twice in Trom's district, so I grew up in North Andover. Later as an adult, I lived in Andover, so I thankfully, later on in life, had the ability to actually vote for Representative Nguyen. But being one of the first families in that region, there sort of was that sort of assumptions that people would have of me. But knowing that I couldn't change that, I really saw that as an opportunity for me to say, I don't want to assume things of other people. So a couple things that I think about my childhood is one where I went to yearbook camp so I could be on the yearbook committee, specifically such a nerd thing, right? So very specifically to not have just the popular teachers highlighted in the yearbook, but the interesting ones that were quiet, and also the ones that were very perceptive of the students who were struggling because of the lack of diversity. And when I say diversity, I mean it across all spectrums. And I wanted those teachers uplifted in our yearbook. And that was a specific reason why I spent the summer at yearbook camp to get myself on the committee senior year. And I also lobbied very hard to have students with disabilities to be included in sports teams, and ended up being a founder and coach to a Special Olympics swim team that still exists to today. And I think as we speak, some of the swimmers that I coached like 25 years ago are Facebook messaging me now, because we're still in touch. And I think it speaks to the power of just not making assumptions and really looking at people as people, and really having the focus of saying, who's not being represented, who's not being heard, who might be having a similar experience that I feel like I might be having, but I have the platform, the ability to be able to make that change. And that has carried forward to all the decisions I've made personally and professionally, why I think that some outsider, 27-year-old outsider, came to Fitchburg, did a couple of projects, and then ultimately ended up knocking on 8,000 doors and becoming mayor against most people's contrary opinion, who didn't think I would get through the primary. But it was those conversations that weren't in the spotlight that really propelled the kind of career and choices I've made.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. Now, Trom, you ran and were elected in a predominantly red district. Am I correct? So tell us about that.
Is this on? Oh, it is. All right. Well, first of all, I have to say it is such an honor to be here, to share the space and to listen to these stories. And I'm actually so glad that you all showed the videos. That was such a great start to reminding us the power of stories and why we need to continue to tell them, and how we can find commonalities so that we can continue to help each other, not only to fit in, but also to thrive in spaces that people often don't see us. And so speaking of spaces where people don't often see us, I represent the 18th Essex District, which includes Andover, North Andover, Tewkesbury, and Boxford. I'm sure many of you have not even been there before. But I was the very first person of color to ever represent this community. And when I first ran for office, it was not a sure deal. And whenever I met people, I reminded them of my story so that they can find commonality to support me. And I always begin with the story that started before me, that my dad served in the Vietnam War alongside US soldiers and served as a prisoner of war essentially for 8 years. And that's how we ended up coming to the United States as political refugees to Lawrence, the city of immigrants. And that was where we found community, how we found people to help us, to allow me to become the first person in my family to graduate from college and then going on to law school. And in the midst of all that, I saw how my parents, as immigrants, had to struggle 2 to 3 jobs, making minimum wage, perhaps not even making minimum wage, or not having a lot of benefits or security in their jobs. And that was what propelled me to then decide to go to law school, to then work at Greater Boston Legal Services, where I helped low-wage workers, immigrants, people with disabilities, and survivors of domestic violence. But in doing all that work, I tell this story because when I tell these my background and how I came to decide to run for office, it really resonated with the people. And that was how I was able to win over a district that was very red and was represented by a far-right Tea Partier. And these stories matter so much, and people remember them. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. I remember one incident where it was a hot summer day. I was, in a t-shirt and just walking down a driveway, and I knocked on this woman's door, and she was an older woman. She looked at me, and she's like, "Are you here to sell me Girl Scout cookies?" And here I was trying to explain to her, I'm a lawyer. I've worked on legislation that you might have heard about. I've actually gotten bills passed. And but the conversations mattered because now this woman has a sign out for me every 2 years. She's been a strong supporter and realized that I can do things. And so it's been an exciting journey. And one of the most important things that I want to focus on is to let people know that it is possible and why it matters for us to have 3 women up here. Is that we want to build a pipeline. We want to encourage more people to run for office. And I'm just so excited to see what other stories come out and how we can help amplify those stories.
Thank you, Trump. I love how all of you are being so personal and being so candid with your sharing. I really appreciate it. It is like a family reunion, isn't it? But it's fantastic. Actually, the story that I remember is that you were once mistaken for a legislative aide when you were trying to go into the House chamber or to the House lobby. And so my first thought was, well, gee, it's I guess in a perverse way, that's progress, because at least she's not being mistaken for a member of the cleaning crew or assumed a cleaning crew. So at least we've elevated to a legislative aide now. So, but Trump, I'm going to stick with you. Since the theme of our event is the invisible becoming visible, specific to our AAPI community, what is the impact of your being in this particular position? How has that helped or represented or helped make us more visible? Because you've done so much.
Thank you for this question. I love it. I am a big believer in representation and why it matters, right? People need to see people who look like them, who've had the same lived experiences, who've overcome obstacles similar to theirs. And it is so important for us to continue to build on that power together. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm a proud member of the House Asian Caucus. I'm vice chair of the caucus, and it's been exciting to work with my colleagues to build on legislation that would help our community. Specifically, we saw the struggles that our communities had to face during the pandemic when we couldn't even access certain resources because of the lack of language access, that people didn't even understand the needs of our communities. And that's why we need data equity to understand that the Asian American community, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiians, we're not a monolith. That different communities have different needs, and we need to be able to understand those needs. There's no Asian language, right? We all speak many different languages, and so how do we assist one another? And these are the types of bills that our caucus have been able to work on. And as you see, all the different levels of government, we're able to amplify many of these issues that are very specific to our communities, whether it's education, healthcare, or just getting help for our small businesses. This is why this month, May, the Asian Caucus is hosting a Shop AAPI month. So if you're on social media, please visit AAPI businesses and amplify them to make sure that we help them recover from the pandemic.
Great, thank you, Tom. Eileen, you really wanted to answer this question. I remember when Eileen and I spent an hour and a half to 2 hours on the phone the other day, just kind of build rapport, and Eileen really wanted to answer this particular question.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. We also want to make time for Lisa. But I would say, I don't think we can underestimate the power of education to help underrepresented groups be seen and heard. Some of the work that I'm proudest of being able to do is to integrate into the K-12 curriculum some of the stories and histories of these groups. In Lexington, we are working toward a K-12 DEI curriculum that includes diverse groups and identities throughout all the disciplines in what's being taught. I'm also working with a group called CARE that's helping to draft legislation to include in the statewide standards for all public schools in the Commonwealth to have a racially and culturally inclusive curriculum. And happily, Tram here is one of the co-sponsors of that bill, and we're hoping that it goes through. And I think this is important because the story of America really isn't complete without the stories of AAPI, African Americans, Indigenous, and Latinx people. And I think it's just so important to have that, to have students learning about that. To take it at an AAPI level, since we're talking that would look like having students learn about Wong Kim Ark, having not just the facts of the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Japanese internment or railroad workers, but actually learning about what kinds of discrimination they faced, what hardships, and what the impact on those communities actually was. And even more importantly, to have the discussions that connects that with our current events, how that past history relates to what's happening now with the anti-Asian hate and so forth. I think those things are important discussions to have. Reading books of AAPI authors to learn about their lived experience, learning about the contributions that AAPI individuals have made to math, science, art, and music. All of that is part of the fabric of this country, and I think these are things that many of us grew up never learning in school. And the importance of it is partly for those groups themselves. I think students of color who get to see themselves reflected in their education are able to gain more of that sense of we really do belong. But it's not just for those students in those groups. It's something that's good for all students because we need to have education that gives that authentic stories, that authentic history. And it's in the kind of global society we have, the ability to really listen to other people's stories and be open to that. I think it's what's going to make for more compassionate adults, more compassionate citizens in our global society.
Great, thanks so much, Eileen. Lisa, you've held a number of different positions throughout the state.
Well, let me just say, I would happily cede my time to Eileen or Trum or actually anybody in this room. And I think one of the things we should do is pretend we're having a panel like this and just have those hour-and-a-half conversations. There's real value in that. And I think part of it is just we don't have space to have those conversations, and we need to make that space. In terms of the role that I've had in terms of building up the AAPI community, especially at the local level where we want to change the faces who are making decisions about things that impact our everyday lives, and also impact the kind of policy making and inclusivity we want to see at their school level, the community level, the workforce level. It's really been about the particular relationships where I would say I can be part of a nuts and bolts conversation. I can be part of being in a position where I show inclusive leadership. And I think some of the most important things I will say to folks is I can be that call that you need to make at midnight, when, especially for a lot of women who are running for office. When I ran, there really weren't a lot of organizations that had started. There were really Act Blue. I had to convince them to actually allow local races to be able to raise money through that platform. There's a lot of things that sort of weren't there at that time. And I keep thinking about needing to build up those organizations. So the $500 check, to specific candidates, or the basically saying if you are need advice at midnight, I can be a person that you can call or text. Those I found to be the difference between building up that confidence so that somebody can then excel or not. Because there are a lot of resources now, but I think part of it is still making that personal connection.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And Lisa did mention sort of, I do wish we had an hour and a half, because this really could take an hour and a half. And I jokingly said in the email exchange we all had, we have 30 minutes to solve world peace. And so now we're down to just under 10. So we have 10 minutes to try to do that solving of world peace. And so the theme of tonight's event is the invisible becoming visible. And we've talked a little bit about where we've been and where we are now. And I'd like for folks who know me know that I'm really big into action items. And so I'd really like for us to see where we can go moving forward. And there are two key areas which, if we're able to touch upon in the final 8 to 10 minutes that we have, that I believe are keys to that. One is building alliances outside of our community with other underserved communities, and the other is maintaining unity within our community as best we can. And we'll start with allyships first. When we have a great question from a member of our audience, Hai Lee, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, from Newton, who asks, how can Asian Americans partner with other marginalized groups to dismantle white supremacy when historically Asian Americans have been used as the model minority? And yes, the model minority myth, and it is a myth, has been used since the 1970s to try to create a wedge between us and other communities. And there does exist a perception that we're not fully in the fight with our BIPOC brothers and sisters. I would argue to the contrary. I think history proves that out as well. But how do we create and strengthen these partnerships? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll start at the basic level, which is to have these kinds of conversations. These were not the kind of conversations that my parents broached to me when we first moved to the suburbs, but these are the kinds of conversations that I'm having with my kids. These are the kinds of conversations I'm having with my neighbors and people in the community, and I think that's where we can all start. The second thing I would propose is that do something outside your comfort zone. So I think oftentimes, especially this day and age, it's easy to kind of be an armchair activist, and it's also easy to get very overwhelmed with all of the problems that we see before us as we're sitting there sort of contemplating all the things. And I would say just choose one thing that is going to make you uncomfortable and try that.
And I want to add to Lisa's point about just being out there and taking risks. And I think the CARE Coalition is really a prime example of that, of people who are committed to an issue, and you're bringing people in who might be uncomfortable getting involved with the legislative process or civically engaged. And I have to give a shout out to you as well, Everett, for your Commonwealth seminar. Getting people to understand how government could work for them is one way for us to work to bring communities, marginalized communities, underserved communities together, and finding these mechanisms to encourage people to work together, including voter engagement. How do we register people to vote? How do we make sure that ballots are in different languages so that people understand that they can be involved. All of these are ways that we can work with other communities. And just to bring it back to COVID for a second, even the start of the pandemic, we saw the writings on the wall that there was going to be harm done to the Asian community because of how the pandemic was blamed to the Chinese government, et cetera. And so what the House Asian Caucus did was we reached out to the Black and Latino Caucus, the Women's Caucus, other communities of color to ask them to stand with us. Even though it was symbolic at the time, it actually served as a foundation for how we handled anti-Asian hate throughout the pandemic and how we've been able to work with these communities so that we can not only build awareness, but actually come up with action items so that we can fully address these issues.
Great, thank you, thanks so much, Tom. And I'm glad that you brought that up. I mean, you mentioned the attacks on our community during and after COVID. They weren't just relegated to COVID. They've been happening for generations. And so we've talked about building allyships with other communities, but what about ourselves? What about building allyships within our communities? I mean, with so many diverse cultures and backgrounds, languages comprising the Asian American umbrella, we're never going to be one monolith. But we have to remember that, referencing the attacks, when they attack one of us, they attack all of us. They don't stop to ask, what political party are you? Or what generation are you? Where did you go to school? They see us as Asians and they attack. But when it comes to politics especially, I think we've all experienced it. You and I have gone into deep dives. We were writing an op-ed for the Globe, and we went into an hour-long deep dive into this. When it comes to attacks and criticisms from our communities, it seems like folks are more harsh, or maybe it's my imagination, but it seems harsher coming from our communities than from others. We all have seen, or many of us have seen, the depiction of State Representative Taki Chan and even Mayor Michelle Wu as Hitler by members of our own community. And so, I want to turn to a question from an audience member, Nam Pham, who I think Nam is probably one of the best people to ask this question, because Nam he and his wife Mary Trong have spent years building bridges across the aisle. And so, using Nam's question as a touch point, Nam's question is, how do we foster a more cohesive and stronger Asian American voice? And how do we foster a more cohesive voice, or at least disagree in a way that doesn't irreparably damage us or divide us? Who'd like to take that one?
Sure. You gave me the tough one. I think we have to recognize that we are all AAPI, but we are not a monolith, and that it's really okay to have different points of view, maybe vastly different points of view. But let that be. We also have to recognize that there is a commonality among us, and that commonality is that we are, just because of our appearance, when we walk into a room, the first thing people see is an Asian face. And I think what comes with that is a lot, as we've already talked about, a lot of assumptions. But very often, we've all had the questions, about where you really come from and so forth. Because I think even back to the history I was talking about through time of AAPI people here, to the current day, we are forever treated as a perpetual foreigner. And I think that's the reason we have to make sure we band together, because we all experience that, and the only way we can help combat that is working together and having that unity, because I think we are stronger together than being apart working on this individually. And I think the same goes for other groups, BIPOC groups and so forth. We do share that commonality, and it makes sense for us to work together rather than treating this as a zero-sum game where, if you win, we lose. It's not like that. And we have to just work hard on that. I think that's our action item.
Tom, any? Okay.
I also want to add that along the same lines is we would have to recognize that we will have differences, and these conversations are so important to have nuanced conversations and not just automatically label people as one or the other. Bipartisan work is very key. The House Asian Caucus is a bipartisan caucus, and I feel like most of the municipal positions are also nonpartisan as well. And so there are opportunities for us to find compromises or path forward with the input of everyone. And I think the one important thing to remember is that we're also human, right? And so if we are not doing something that you agree with or disagree with, talk to us. I think that is the most important thing, because we would not know what you care about unless you tell us, and we will do what we can to incorporate that. But as Liz mentioned earlier, when you're Asian American, people have certain expectations that you need to represent me, you need to represent a certain view, but there's no one particular view. So I want to be able to hear all the different views to make an informed decision, and I want to hear from you of what your particular views are.
Great, thanks so much. And well, we're running short on time, so our last question will be a lightning round. I've always loved lightning rounds, so it's kind of moving forward, sort of pushing the ball forward. What are our next steps? What action items would you suggest? What do you have hope for? Something we'll go quick. We'll start with Lisa. You haven't started first yet, so we'll go with Lisa, then we'll go Eileen and Trump.
Great. I'm going to actually answer both questions, the last one and this one, by saying that find a safe space to continue this conversation. During COVID, I started a book club, and it was extremely cathartic, and we're looking to kind of reinvent that space now. But books, poetry, art, music, these are all really, really great ways to creatively expand that conversation as well.
My hope for the future is our young people, our next generation who will step into our shoes one day. And I think what we need to be doing is to let them understand the possibilities. I think part of the problem early on was if you feel you don't belong, you don't even think that it's possible to get involved, to make a difference, to do this work. And I think I don't want to have young people growing up feeling, as I did, that I didn't totally belong. I want them to see those possibilities. And I think through our holding these positions, we get to be the role models for that, and letting those young people have voice and learning how that they can actually use it.
Excellent. Thanks. Trump.
I want to encourage people to get engaged in an upward cycle, which is the opposite of a vicious cycle. The more you get AAPI people into elected office, into leadership positions, more people will get engaged, more people will want to get involved, and then it starts to cycle over. And it's not just getting people into elected office. I'm encouraged to see the level of support. I'm actually looking around the room, and I'm seeing a lot of my supporters here as well. Stay engaged with us to help us move up, so that we can bring others along and get more others into the pipeline, so that we can have representation at all different levels of government, both in the public and private sector.
That's fantastic. Thank you all so much for your answers. Thank you all so much for your generosity, your candor, and your personal stories. And I do want to encourage all of you. This is just the first step. I think Asian hate, racism, they won't take a day off, and neither can we. So week by week, month by month, year by year, we have to stay in the fight. And there are so many ways we can do that. Trump mentioned supporting candidates like these who are on the podium, and also folks who are out there, even those who are not Asian Americans, those who are sympathetic and supportive of Asian American causes. Supporting events like these, which help educate and unite our community. And Eileen mentioned supporting the youth. I'm big into supporting and promoting and developing the next generation of leaders. And there are so many organizations out there that do this work. It's A Voice from Asian CDC. The Korean American Citizens League actually just had their internship scholarship banquet over the weekend. Chinese Progressive Association, Viet Aid, Boston Asian YES, and yes, a completely self-indulgent plug for the Commonwealth Seminar. These are all organizations that are training leaders to move move us forward. And so this is a generational struggle. And so we need everybody in this room, everybody at home to do your parts to stay in this fight and to keep pushing us forward. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you. Can we give the panel a quick... Thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you to GBH. Thank you for your leadership, and especially and your courage. Never mind leadership, your courage, especially in this time, in this climate, to host an event like this. We are so grateful to have a space like GBH to host an event like this. So thank you so much to GBH. Thank all of you for being here. Enjoy our next remarkable panel. Jim has his panel prepped and ready. Looking forward to that. And enjoy the rest of the evening together. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Leverett. Thank you so much, Leverett, Tram, Lisa, and Eileen, for your incredible comments and thoughts. As I was listening, I was thinking so many words to live by. One, making that personal connection with people in your community and outside the community, stories that bridge differences. When we learn someone else's story, it's really hard to hate or fear them. Certainly, and trying to raise all boats with communities of color and difference, and trying to partner and be an ally with everyone. Next generation, who can argue with that? This is, hopefully while we're here, that we're hopefully inviting that next generation to be involved. So our next fabulous panel will be, and as I say your name, if you could come up and be seated, that would be great, will be moderated by Jim Dow. Since last year, Jim has been editor of the Boston Globe's editorial page, where he oversees editorials, of course, op-eds, letters, and the ideas section. Prior to joining the Globe, Jim spent 30 years at the New York Times as a reporter, a national correspondent, covering state and national politics. He was embedded with American troops during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was also the paper's deputy national editor, as well as op-ed and metro editor. He won an Emmy for a multimedia series entitled A Year at War. Joining Jim is Dr. Amar Sahani, who is the chairman and CEO of Instilla, the CEO of Rejoini, and also the founding partner and CEO of Pramand, LLC. He holds more than 150 patents. That's right, 150 patents, which form the basis of several first-of-a-kind medical devices that have helped over 10 million patients worldwide. He has founded 10 companies, which account for over 5,000 jobs created and over $3 billion in revenue to date. Dr. Sahani has been recognized by several awards, including being named the Champions of Change and Outstanding America by Choice Awards from the White House. Joining them is Laura Sen, who serves on numerous board of directors, including Mass Mutual, Burlington Stores, Massport, the Boston Ballet, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and the Pine Street Inn, where she served as chairwoman. From 2009 to 2016, she served as a president and chief executive officer of BJ's Wholesale Club. Connie Chin, next up, is the executive director of Global Arts Live, which brings inspiring music and dance from all corners of the world to stages across Greater Boston. Connie served as the president of the Norman B. Leventhal Map and Education Center at the Boston Public Library for 5 years. And before that, was general manager at Jacob's Pillow for 12 seasons and oversaw the operations of the International Dance Festival, school, community programs, and the management of a 220-acre historic campus. All yours, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz and Leverett, for inviting me to do this. I'm new to the region, as you just learned, and this is such a fantastic way to meet people and learn more about Boston. I want to correct Leverett on one thing. I did not prep the group on questions. Being a journalist, I'm going to just spring things on them. But But these are questions I sort of gleaned from conversations with each of them. They've had remarkable careers, and I was hoping to get you each to talk a little bit about key inflection points in your careers. I'm going to start with you, Amar. You, as we just learned, you've been involved in over a dozen startups. You have 150 patents, which is an extraordinary number. I think you've been dubbed a serial inventor, if I have that right, and that's a compliment. Yet, when you started out after earning a master's in chemical engineering at the University of Texas, you say you were turned down by the first 30 employers you applied to, and I'm just fascinated to find out from you about how you got from that discouraging start to being someone who created, and then ran so many businesses. How did you turn that lack of opportunity into so many great opportunities?
Thanks, Jim. Firstly, it's a pleasure to be with everybody in this August company. So thank you for the opportunity. So when I came from India, I was actually reasonably privileged. Unlike many immigrants who may have had a much tougher time, I had in India all the options available to me for business schools, for a great job, all of this. But the University of Texas was giving me a scholarship, and I said, hey, why not go check out what the US is all about? So that's kind of how I came to the US. And, before that, there was not an interview that I had not gotten accepted. I'd never failed anything. So I came here, did my master's, and applied for jobs dutifully like I'd done in India. And 30 places I applied to, and 29 summarily rejected me because I didn't have the authorization to work, meaning I didn't have the papers, no green card, no H1. People didn't understand H1 visas and stuff at that time. But being eternally optimistic, I said, hey, once there, all you need is one job. How many more do you need? So I showed up for the Eastman Kodak interview, and they realized they hadn't read my application properly, and they rejected me there. So I said, well, that was pretty discouraging. So that was a seminal moment, a fork in the road. I said, do I really want to stay in this place? Looks like, the odds are people don't want me here. Or should I go back to India where I was, the golden-eyed, whatever. I had all the opportunities. So, but I've never wanted to take no for an answer. So I said, no, let me talk to my advisor, who was a very wise gentleman, only a few years older than me, but he was wiser. And he said, you know what, you're not a bad researcher. You want to do a PhD, why don't you do a PhD? So I said, okay, well, what's it all about? So he gave me a couple of choices of projects, and I said, yeah, this sounds interesting. So I stuck on, did my PhD, and there we came up with these materials that for the first time you could do chemistry inside the body. You could make materials in contact with living tissue without harming the first cell. And so you could transport things with little tubes and pipes and sprayers and get inside various parts of the body all over. And it was a very fundamental technology. Some venture capitalists from the California Bay Area recognized this, came in, licensed that technology. And that's how I got my first job into a startup. I showed up over here in Kendall Square, myself and Mark Levin, who's a legendary venture capitalist over here, in an empty room. And he says, hey, go hire some people, go build a lab. I knew nothing about either of those, but I went out and started doing it. And soon it turned into something. And from that, it's turned into a dozen companies. My partner and I, this year, will celebrate 25 companies in 25 years.
Laura, I'm going to jump to the second half of your career. You don't get to start at the beginning. You had a long and illustrious career at a major company, BJ's Wholesale Club. But before you reached the pinnacle of BJ's, becoming its CEO at one point, you tell a story about having experienced a rather difficult setback there. And tell us what that setback was and how you overcame it and where it took you.
I got fired. Nobody likes to get fired, right? What happened was I had risen to the position of Executive Vice President of Merchandising and Marketing, which was same level as the Executive Vice President of Operations. So my job was to work with all the people who sourced the product, shipped it to the clubs, marketed and promoted, memberships and so on. And his job, my counterpart, was to run all the clubs. It's typical in a retailer. There's merchandising, operations. Those are the top two jobs. P&L responsibility, typical. So the CEO who was in place was leaving for various reasons, and this other gentleman and I were the two contenders to become CEO. And my boss, who was the chairman of the board, said, you should go campaign with the board for, the CEO slot. And, I told your counterpart the same thing. And I said, Herb, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go sell myself around to the board. They know me. They know what I've done. They know who I am. They can pick whoever they want. Well, that was like a really stupid decision. So, of course, the board picked the other guy. And I would say maybe that was kind of an Asian moment. I was not running around promoting myself, which was not a good idea. And so he became the CEO, and he was really a difficult boss for me. We had very different styles, and I did not enjoy working for him. And 6 months later, he fired me. So, clearly that was the result of my not getting the job, and things might have turned out differently. However, I, left the company. I did not want to relocate. Our family's very established and locally, and so I, opened a consulting practice, which went super well. It was really a good experience, and I kept in touch with the people from the company because obviously I had worked there a long time. I had a lot of friends, and I knew that the person who became the CEO had a style that was very unfriendly to the team members and was very difficult. And 2.5 years later, the chairman calls me up and he says, "Do you want to have lunch?" And I'm like, "Well, sure, Christmas shopping, but I can, make some time." And when I got to that lunch, it was very clear that he was not going to let me leave that restaurant without me agreeing to come back to the company. Not as CEO, because he was going to be the CEO after he got rid of the other guy, but to be his understudy. So I became his understudy, and a year later I became president, chief operating officer, and then a year later I became CEO. So that's my happy ending to getting fired.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that? What did you take away from that experience?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't know if I would have campaigned with the board that I would have received the job, but I certainly would have had a better shot. And I would say that, thinking about this theme, somebody, I think in the last panel, someone said, use your voice. You have to use your voice. And I think that the challenge is that, becoming visible to me, that means, don't take this the wrong way, like being more American, being more pushy, being more sell yourself, being more aggressive. And I think that might fly in the face of what many Asian cultures value. And I think that the interesting question is, how do you do both? How do you be yourself? And how do you go out there and get what you get? So you saw that last panel. Those women had awesome personalities. Like, I'd definitely vote for them. But they definitely, I mean, my guess is nobody came from a household or background that said, this is how you're going to behave to succeed. So.
Great, thank you. Connie, you, as a young person, you dreamed of being a dancer. You became a dancer, and you danced for years. And then when it came time to hang up the dancing shoes, I guess, at least professionally, you went into arts management and organization. Pretty big change. Talk a little bit about how you made that decision, and what was it that made you think you'd be good at that? Because obviously you were.
First, I want to say that I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, and GBH was huge in our household. My mother was a member till her death and so valued everything here. And so if she could know that I was on this stage tonight, it would be that success. So the question is about my career transitions. Yes, I was a dancer for 10 years. I was in New York. And when, speaking about allyship in the earlier panel, I was reflecting that I did a lot of work that were with other artists of color, and we didn't call them that then, but when you're an artist, you're working around humanity, and it's common and it's global. And I worked with an African-American artist, Jawole Willow-Jozala, whose company is called Urban Bush Women, with a Korean artist named Sincha Hong. I got to tour Seoul and Busan with that company. The Asian American Art Ensemble with Fred Ho, and so I was able to work creatively with other Asian Americans in New York. So there was a lot of sort of organic allyship, I think, going on in that arts world. When I transitioned out of being a dancer, I went on to business school. I was always interested in management. I was interested in organizing things from day one, from early, high school and college. Dance companies, I was always the one with the attendance list and the schedule and figuring out what was coming next. And that really continued. And so when I got through business school and I did a stint in corporate brand management and I had all this training, I continued to want to bring what I could to organizing things. So I think the moment you're probably asking about is I had finished up with corporate marketing. I had my children, one of whom is here tonight, and my husband looked across the study at me and said, well, we had moved to Oregon. I brought you here for the business I bought. It's your turn. What do you want to do next? I said, well, I would really love to put together my dance interests and all of this business training that I have and management. I knew how to lead brand teams. And he said, well, the director of marketing position at Jacob's Pillow is open. In 3 months, there we were, 2 kids, back across the country, returning to Massachusetts happily. And now that I've come through several different nonprofit and arts administration positions, I can't tell you how thrilled I am that I am now CEO of Global Arts Live and 585 Arts, and you don't know what that is yet. But Global Arts Live, if you don't know, it used to be called World Music, Crash Arts. Yeah, right? And thank you. And for 33 years, but this organization has been bringing arts from all over the world, from all continents, to Boston stages, those of you that know. So, for example, we've been bringing Zakir Hussain for 20 years, Ravi Shankar, Anushka Shankar is coming. We just had Yamato, drums and dance, and Korean, Samuel Nure, and across also African, Caribbean, and Latin American artists. And the point of this being is that I've been a person of privilege who has been educated in America, grown up American, and I've come full circle to really embracing how important it is to bring arts and culture from all over the world into our lives. And if I can do one more piece.
Yes.
So what's going to make the invisible visible, it's bringing, of course, cultures into the limelight that you might not otherwise see. But also we're opening a new performing arts center in 2026, which will finally be our permanent home. So there'll be a center that's focused on global arts and culture and BIPOC centered. So that'll be in Kendall Square in 2026.
Well, in a way, you preempted my next question, because I was going to ask you about your role, your job almost every day is about bringing the invisible to the visible. And could you share with us, is there an example of that you feel was particularly poignant or important, or you brought a culture that this region wasn't seeing and made it visible?
Most recently, we brought a Kurdish artist named Ainur to the Somerville Theater, and we didn't know what to expect. We hadn't presented anybody from this culture before, As the audience came in, first of all, outside at the in the parking on the street, I encountered a person who was like, "How do these parking meters work?" And I said, "Oh, are you coming to the concert?" And he said, "Yes, I'm Kurdish." And so I explained how the parking meters worked, and it gave me a little sense of, okay, this is going to be an audience that is really from this community and this culture. And as the concert went on, this was not really set up for dancing, but in the back, where there was just a little, like this much space, they started doing the line folk dances all together, and there were kids, and it felt like such a community celebration. And this is where, I get this charge of arts and culture is so important to our identity. I'm sure you have brought your kids to things because they're growing up here in America, and you want them to have a taste, right, of their heritage and the culture. And so that's an important piece that is so satisfying to do. And it's also that we're honoring immigrant communities of this area. And introducing this to other people. So, I encourage you, of course, to come and try something you haven't seen. And maybe you've never seen tabla music, and you come to Zakir Hussain, and you will be amazed, I can tell you.
That's great. Thank you. Laura, I wanted to ask you, the immigrants and the children of immigrants typically grapple with the influences of multiple cultures. And you, and me as well, have the added dimension of coming from mixed-race families. Could you talk a little bit about the different ways that your parents' different backgrounds shaped you and your career, and were there conflicts along the way?
Well, it's not about being Asian, because my greatest influence was my mother's very loud Irish family. They all, told stories and swore and drank, and and I would tell you there were two things that got me prepared for business. One was to be around a bunch of loud men who were, being shocking all the time, which is what happens when you go into business as a young 22-year-old Asian woman who's exotic. And the second thing was my mother had a very short fuse, so she used to get mad at and be fiery in that Irish way. And what I learned was, the hotter you get, the colder I'm going to be. Conflict, confrontation, people being, sort of out of control. I just makes me calmer and calmer, and that works really well for business. But I also think, and maybe a stereotype, I think that's like an Asian thing, right? You can sort of use that quiet strength as your weapon, right? Just my opinion.
Amar, when you were in Austin in the late 1980s, I guess in the early 1990s too, you said you were among the few South Asians and maybe among the only Sikhs there. Tell us about what that was like in Texas at that time, how you navigated it, and what brought you to Boston, and what kind of community did you find when you came here?
So as a Sikh, I had sort of a little bit of the opposite problem. I was very visible. I was not invisible by any stretch. I was very visible, but utterly misunderstood. So the typical experience, say I walked into a Dairy Queen, the entire Dairy Queen would reorganize itself into an amphitheater, not different than this, with me at the center. If that happened, I was once walking down and a car comes screeching to a halt next to me, and a young kid, I guess a few years younger than me, reaches his hand out and says, "My roommate's Iranian too." I said, well, that's really nice, but what am I going to say? I didn't want to give him a lesson in geography, but I looked at that and I realized that a lot of folks were because fear came of the unknown, of not understanding, not knowing anything about you. So without sort of becoming tiresome, there was a fine line to walk between educating and becoming proselytizing. So you didn't want to you had to walk that fine line. And actually you realized that people, once they understood a little bit about you, I had a plethora of friends at that point in time, and you became like the most interesting person in the party, kind of a situation. So I have always believed in turning any perceived weakness as a strength. It's got two sides of the coin. And that experience, I had the best 5 years of my life in Austin.
That's great. I'm going to take a question from the audience. Janet Sung from Boston asks, and I'll pose this to each of you actually. Did you ever encounter the stereotype for Asian Americans as worker bees who lacked leadership skills? And if so, how did you overcome that?
Gosh, I don't think anybody ever mistook me as a worker bee because there weren't too many Sikhs around. So, the thing about standing out is most people fade into the background, want to not attract attention to themselves. Sikhs were created to attract, so they would stand out amongst 100,000 people. So there was no hiding. But I think the assumption I can say, I know this is being recorded, but I'll say it anyway. The stereotype was we were hosting a fundraiser for Ed Markey. So Ed comes in, he sees me somewhere else, and he says, Dr. Singh, Dr. Singh. I said, well, thank you, Ed. And he says, how do I know you're Dr. Singh? I said, tell me, please. He says, well, I know that all Indians are doctors. And you're a Sikh, so you have to have a last name Singh. So it's Dr. Singh. I said, accurate, but vaguely disconcerting. So that's as close as I came.
I think the Globe is going to get some letters from Ed Markey tomorrow.
Happened with Tommy Thompson, our HHS secretary, also the same actually thing.
Oh my gosh.
Same thing.
Laura, how about you? Did you encounter that stereotype? Do you have an Ed Markey story too? You can add.
I actually never had that problem. I'm maybe just naturally bossy. I don't know, but I think I early on in my career, I was always in the philosophy that's a little maybe stale at this point, but the servant leader. Like, you serve your workers as best as possible. My very, very first job, I worked at Jordan Marsh downtown. If any of you are old enough to remember the department store, Jordan Marsh, that was my first job as a department manager, an executive trainee. And all the people who worked for me were in their 50s and 60s, these, lovely older women from, North End, East Boston, they were pros. I mean, they didn't need me for anything. But what I really did was respect them a lot and learn from them a lot and tell them how much, I appreciated them. Okay, so it was the handbag department. So I don't know, there may be some women in here who are familiar with this brand, but it's Judith Lieber makes these, see? These beautiful evening bags that are very special. And honestly, I only stayed there 1 year, but there was a Judith Lieber bag in the case. And we never sold it. It was too expensive. I mean, and they must have marked it down several times and gave it to me as a going away present. I still have it.
Connie, how about you?
Well, I've had my share of being taken for the service staff, but I actually want to talk about more the internal confidence to say, okay, you're not a worker bee. I mean, I always was the person, like, I felt like I have to do my homework, I have to be prepared. And, I never really aimed to be a leader, as kind of ended up here. And it's a transition to feeling like you are the person that has to do everything. I mean, in my office, I still take out the trash. To you are the person that now has to represent your organization and to speak for it and to communicate with people and to lead and to mentor and to pay it back to other people who are coming up around me as well. So it's more of a psychological, like, don't be a worker bee, be a leader.
Vivian Tsang from Malden has an interesting question. I may amend this slightly, but she says, do you hold yourself up as role models for AAPI youths to follow as a path to success? Or do you think your individual success could actually be irrelevant to group success and mobility? And by that, I think she's asking, do you see yourself as a template for people to follow? Or do you think that, your individual success is just a unique individual thing and that perhaps it has no impact on the bigger group? It's a complicated question, but...
Yeah, so when I speak to, say, lots of entrepreneurs will come and we'll have a conversation about how to go about things. What I try to tell them is that I cannot give them a roadmap. Everybody has their own roadmap. Everybody's situation is different. The challenges they'll face are different. So there is no one roadmap for success. So I cannot be a template for everybody or anybody. Not that I've had that much of success or anything, but it can't be a template. It cannot be a roadmap. All I can do is teach them how to think, not what to think, but how to think, how to tackle problems, how to have values, how to do the right thing, how to associate with other good people, how to hold them dear, how to be compassionate, how to be humble, how to look at these types of things, how to serve other people, so that, one of the best ways of abolishing hate is if you get out there and serve other people and stuff. It's very difficult to hate somebody when you understand that they're trying to do good. So these are things that you will teach people how to think about how to lead their life, get a moral compass, have a value system. And then from there, they will hopefully be able to lead their life and succeed in many other ways. There's not one road for success. There's many ways that people can succeed, and success should also not be defined by monetary success. Success should be, have you achieved a level of sort of optimized living, sustainable living that is not burdening the earth, that's not sort of, causing trauma to other people. It's a good life that is lived that you can be proud of. So that is what success shouldn't be just because you make this much of money or you have these many, even for example, job creation or whatever else. It is, success is a very personal thing. And are you satisfied? And teaching people that is more important.
Nicely said. Thank you. Laura, how about you?
Well, this isn't about me, but I have a very dear friend. Her name is Susan Tran. She's a newscaster on television. And she always tells me this story. When she was a young girl, she used to talk a lot at school and get in trouble for talking a lot. And then one night on the news, she saw Connie Chung. And she saw it, and she said, wait a minute, she's Chinese, I'm Chinese. She's getting paid to talk. I can do this. She went to BU. She came from LA. She went to BU, majored in communications, and she's been in broadcast journalism ever since because of Connie Chung. I totally believe in role models.
And are you one?
Hope so.
Oh, it's such an interesting question about a template. I don't think that I can, great answers so far, that you can say that there's a template, but what I do think about when young people come to me and say, how do you get to where I am? Obviously you do a good job along the way, but what we can do is open doors for them, because there is such a, especially in Boston, I think a network of people who have traditionally opened doors for people. And for us as Asian Americans to think about, can I connect somebody to somebody? Will that help them? Will that give them a perspective? Will that help them understand that you can, rise in this field? Is super important.
We have just seconds left. And I think you've all maybe answered this, but I'm going to give you one chance to summarize your lives for us. If you wanted people to take away one thing from your experiences, what would that thing be? Maybe Connie, you want to start?
Well, one of the privileges of being a third and second generation Chinese American, my parents did the hard work, and I am privileged to have been able to follow my passion. And so that's what I would leave you with: follow your passion.
I would say, go ask for what you want. Just say what you want. Don't be afraid to say what you want and ask. Put your voice out there. And this was drilled into me by my fiery Irish mother. If you don't ask, you don't get. So just put yourself out there.
I would say take interest in other people's lives and try to serve as best as you can in whatever way you can.
And with that, thank you. We are only 23 seconds over. Great job. Thank you so much.
I want to thank all 6 of our panelists. I thought that the stories that you all shared were both personal and candid and ultimately incredibly inspiring. So thank you to our panel. And now we would like to thank another person. This event is made possible by the tremendous support of dedicated community leaders who serve on GBH's boards, and one respected leader who has been very, very involved in the success of our annual AAPI events is Helen Chin Schlichty. As we can tell by this standing ovation, Helen is a revered member of the community and has been an extremely generous advocate of GBH's efforts to celebrate and support the local AAPI community. Helen has been a notable figure in Boston's political and philanthropic landscape for decades. She was one of the first Asian American women to achieve prominence as a public administrator. She entered public service in 1949 and retired in 2003 from her position as assistant to the Secretary for Administration and Finance in Massachusetts. During her service, she worked with 13 secretaries and 12 governors in the Commonwealth. Helen is a co-founder of the Asian Community Fund at Boston Foundation, the co-founder and past president of the South Cove Manor Nursing Home, where she has served on the board for over 40 years, and is the former vice chair of the boards of directors for the United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley, and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And I'm going to keep going. She has also served on the boards of the Boys and Girls Club and Youth Villages, and luckily for us has been active on GBH's boards since 2000, first as a member of the Board of Advisors, and since 2006 has been a member of the Advisors Council. She's been an integral part of the annual GBH AAPI Planning Committee since its inception. Helen is committed to building connections to AAPI leaders across the Commonwealth on behalf of GBH, and she has made a tremendous impact. All of us at GBH are so grateful for her dedication over the years. She is truly giving of her vast wisdom, precious time, and is a champion of positivity for the AAPI community. This award acknowledges our sincere gratitude for all the immeasurable contributions Helen has made to the AAPI community and for her decades of service to the foundation. Helen, on behalf of this year's AAPI Annual Cultural Heritage Month Board Planning Committee and GBH World, we thank you for your leadership in the AAPI community and present you with this year's AAPI Chinatown Gate Award. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Can you hear me? Am I, good. Thank you very, very much, Susan, for this award, and welcome to Boston.
Thank you.
I really don't deserve this award because I really should be thanking GBH for all it has done for me over the many, many years. I remember when GBH was down the street and there were the auctions in those days, and we had to go down to the bays down there if we bought something at the auction to pick it up. And now here we are in this gorgeous, gorgeous space down here. But also, let me say something about the invisible. My mom, who passed away several years ago at 103, used to say to us, and my brother Fran is here, right here, he's also a member, member of the GBH board, used to say to us, be invisible, keep your head down, just work hard. Do others remember that? And if you do your work well enough, people will recognize it, and then you will be rewarded. Well, my mom used to take Saturday afternoon. She didn't speak much English, but she could understand what was happening. And she would be sitting there glued to GBH watching all of the cooking shows. Now, of course, for me, GBH has been wonderful over the long period of time with the old days of Victory Garden, and Joyce Chen was one of the first Chinese cooking shows, and then, of course, Julia Child. And now it's American Experience, America Reframed, Frontline, Masterpiece. I mean, it's just so wonderful. And of course, I have to remember 89.7 with Jim and Marjorie every morning, if I can get to it. But we are so fortunate to be here in this community with all that there is for GBH. And of course, starting back when this program first started, I think Leverett and I were the two early pioneers, and it was maybe about 15 years ago, and the two of us were the ones who were co-hosts. And look what we have today, how proud we are. But I also want to thank Liz Chang, because Liz is the person who, with her colleagues, have made it a point to continue over the years to save the month of May as the month where we present all of these wonderful programs. Take a look at the world this month. Take a look at the several pages that talk about the programs and the commitment that GBH has made to having events like this. So Liz, thank you very much also. And one more person I want to thank. The panelists were all great, but Connie Chin, who was on the last panel, her dad, Professor Robert Chin from Boston University, was the first president of South Cove Manor Nursing Home. He guided us back in the 40 years ago as we were, as all grassroots volunteers, trying to figure out how to put a nursing home together for the Chinese community. And we had no money for consultants or anything, but it was Professor Chin who guided us. So thank you, Connie. And thank you very much, Susan.
Congratulations again, Auntie Helen, on this well-deserved honor and recognition of your tireless dedication to our community. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Yu, and I'm a member of GBH's Board of Advisors, and I also served on the planning committee for tonight's AAPI Cultural Heritage Month event. Since my family didn't have cable, I watched a lot of PBS growing up and still do to this day. Public media holds a special place in my heart. This evening, we've watched excerpts from GBH World AAPI films and heard from 2 insightful panels with AAPI leaders who have shattered glass ceilings and achieved professional success in traditionally underrepresented areas. Whether it's local news on GBH 89.7, PBS programs on GBH 2 and GBH 44, diverse content on world or its national programs that can also be found online on almost any device, Frontline, Nova, Masterpiece, American Experience, America Reframed, Local USA, Stories from the Stage, and so many more. GBH discovers and amplifies diverse voices, such as those we've heard tonight. GBH focuses on what matters to you through its stories that are produced by GBH and World and shared with audiences globally. We invite you to join GBH and World in their work, serving communities across the country. If you live in Boston, you can volunteer your time at GBH or donate to support programming and events that help us learn, appreciate, and celebrate differences. Please consider joining our public media family and supporting at any level. It's easy to do. For our remote audience, just click on the link in the chat tab and give what you can. If you're joining us in person, we'll provide more details on membership during our upcoming reception. And as a reminder, we'll share all of tonight's resources with you in our follow-up email. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. And now back to Liz Cheng.
Thank you so much, Emily, for everything that you do and for all our committees. It's just been wonderful. And can we have congratulations again to Auntie Helen? Who's better deserving than her? We so thank our skilled moderators, Leverett and Jim, as well as our insightful panelists, Connie, Eileen, Tram, Amar, Laura, and Lisa. And thank you to Mayor Wu for joining us virtually. As a reminder, you can see the film tonight, 7 films on resilience, and certainly Blurring the Color Line on the 25th. But of course, you can see them all online, as well as all our 50 films that we're showcasing this month. Thank you so much to the GBH Board of Trustees, Board of Advisors, and Advisors Council for helping us create tonight's content and curate with us so many great community partners. We really could not do this event without you. Round of applause for them, really. See them up there. Thank you also for our event sponsor, Bernadine Sun-Megason and Tim Sullivan of Compass Real Estate. I saw them here earlier. Thanks to our local community partners that you'll see outside. Every year we try to elevate partners that you might not know in the community doing incredible work. And this year we have the Asian Community Fund, started by Helen and Paul Lee, the Indian Society of Worcester, Sahili Boston, and Viet Aid, and we thank them so much for coming tonight and sharing their work with us. Many thanks, really, to incredible GBH staffers. Kate Kataja, who I think is back there somewhere. Yay. Liz Haggard, who's sitting over here, minding business. And of course, Amy Axelrod. She didn't want to be thanked, but too bad. So thank you all so much for coming and participate, and let's eat.